Hi, Pecanwood College. This week I've heard more and more people commenting on how this is getting a little bit too much now. I've heard a lot of people saying this is enough. When is this going to be over? How much longer do you think we're going to be sitting here? Um, and I think it's across the board. I think it's all genders, cultures, ages that are just losing motivation quite a lot at the moment. I think for adults and older children, it's slightly different in that they are able to verbalize how they feel or the things that are getting them down. And so I think it's a little bit easier. But with younger children, it's different because they're not always able to explain what it is that is getting them down. So you'll see behavioral changes in younger children, tantrums, just overall irritability. And yeah, I almost describe it as a bit of a laziness. Sometimes they just kind of lie around and they'll say things like, I'm bored, I don't want to do this. And I have definitely seen it in my house, specifically with the online learning at the moment. I'm having a particularly hard time motivating them to get certain things done. I think with adults, we are almost forced to be motivated in that, if we don't get ourselves off the couch and to the shops, then there's no food in the house. And if we do not do this work, then there's a high likelihood we're not going to get paid. So with adults, because we can see the consequences, and because they are very real consequences, it's often easier for us to be more motivated. But with children, them becoming unmotivated doesn't always have a consequence. So lying on the couch, food still lands up in the fridge, our clothes still get washed, everything still happens around us without us having to do much to change our behavior. So it's slightly different and it's slightly more difficult to motivate a child. I think it was only right this week for me to maybe just give you some tips and ideas on how to keep that motivation going and just overall how to keep the spirits up at home. So just in general, if I could say keeping the spirits up at home, my first idea would be just to get out the house. So that time between 6 and 9 in the morning, when we're allowed to get out and do something, I think it's important that you do get out and do something and encourage your children to do the same. So even if you're not a particularly active family, I think even a short walk up and down the road will do your children wonders. The change of scenery and just what that does for your physical and emotional well-being is unbelievable. So get out, get out the house, go and do something. Secondly, laughter is so important. So I want to challenge all of you parents to become a little bit silly at home. The laughter, bringing laughter into your house, will be so effective in just reducing stress levels at home. So, be silly, become a child again. Go and find something silly to do. So play hide and seek, play touches, play games, dance, pull funny faces, have like a tickle war. Do what you need to do to bring that laughter back into your house. And even if it's once a week, even better twice a week, even better once a day, do what you can to bring laughter into your house. In my house, what we do is we have a sock war. I have mentioned it before, but basically we just take our socks out of the cupboard. We go and raid all the cupboards and get every pair of socks that we can. We keep them bundled up in pairs, like they're normally stored in your cupboard. And as we count down from 10, everybody bolts off with whatever socks you have in your hand, and it just becomes an hour of throwing socks at each other around the house. Obviously, with rules in place that socks are the only thing that you may throw, but it is brilliant and so much fun, and it really turns into just everyone having a good laugh. So I challenge all of you to just bring a little bit of laughter into your home, and be silly. Be a kid again and be silly. When it comes to your online learning, I've had a lot of parents asking questions like, how does the teacher get this right? Is my child like this in class? Because I can't seem to get them to concentrate for very long or focus for very long. How on earth does a teacher motivate 20 children, and I'm really struggling to motivate my one or my two children? So I think that there are a couple of things in place, and I think we need to give ourselves a bit of a break. As mentioned last week, online learning is uncharted territory, especially in the circumstances we find ourselves in. And so we are all learning. And like I mentioned before, we're just aiming for progress. We're not really aiming for perfection at this point. So I think we need to remember as well that teachers were trained to motivate and teach and find effective ways of teaching children, and parents weren't. So I think that as we engage in online learning, we are learning from day to day how to become motivators and how to find effective ways of teaching our children. And we are find ways that are working really well, and in other ways things are not working really well. So with each day comes new challenges and new things that we need to kind of figure out. Coupled with the fact that school, or the school that your child attends, is kind of rooted in routine. And so your child finds security and safety in the element in the idea of waking up in the morning, getting dressed, and we go to school, and day in and day out when we attend school generally follows the same pattern. And that pattern involves sitting behind a desk at some point in the day and doing some kind of work. And because their friends also sit down with them and do exactly the same, there's this expectation that learning needs to happen. And so it perhaps happens slightly easier in a classroom than it does at home. And on top of that, just the whole idea of school is that there's an expectation that learning should take place. So, and I'm not for 1 minute saying that learning doesn't take place at home, but it's far more informal and it happens more incidentally. So while you're busy cooking something, you might be teaching your child something. Whereas at school, there is a specific lesson that needs to occur, and there is this formal connotation that is associated with school. It's where we learn. And so when your child gets up and goes to school in the morning, they're prepared for that. So being at home is quite different. Being at home and learning is quite different to being at school and learning. In saying all of this, we need to try and keep our children motivated. And so I want to talk a little bit about how you would possibly do that and give you some tips on how to keep them motivated. What you're aiming for is an intrinsic motivation. We don't really want our children to be extrinsically motivated. And what I mean by that is extrinsic motivation is when your child works towards something because they're getting an iPad, or they're getting a toy or a sweet or something like that. Intrinsic motivation is I'm doing this for me. I need to make sure this is done because I know that it is a good thing for me. And you'll find that your intrinsically motivated children, you only have to ask them once and they generally get stuff done. Whereas extrinsically motivated children, we have to ask them a couple of times before they get going. So the first thing that you need to know is consistency is vital. Try as far as possible to mimic the structure and routine that is so prominent in a school environment. So they know that at a certain time I'm going to sit down and do some kind of learning, and that is the area that it is designated to learning. So try as far as possible to mimic that. Secondly, praise effort. You'll find that your child has an increased self-esteem and increased motivation when you praise the effort that they put into what it is that they are doing. So when they feel that they are noticed and they are validated, that their effort is noticed and validated, they will be more motivated to try the next time around when you ask them to do something. Allow for natural consequences. I think that a lot of the time we try and shelter our children from experiencing anything negative, and so we take away those consequences. And I think it's very important that they experience that. So if you didn't do your homework, this is the consequence for that. If you didn't do your project that was expected, this is the consequence for that. And let them feel those consequences because they learn through their mistakes. So it's very important that that happens. And at home, for where we are at the moment, I think it's important that you put some natural consequences in place as well. So if you do not do X, this is what's going to happen. And it's important that you communicate those consequences to your children ahead of time. And then lastly is just that motivation is often rooted in love. If I could put it this way, if your boss came to work and you were not performing, and the first thing out of his mouth was a criticism, you did not do this yesterday, why didn't you do it? It's unacceptable. I can tell you now that it's probably going to make you quite unmotivated. And it works the same with children. If you criticize and you try and motivate them in anger or frustration, you're going to get the opposite reaction. You might get a bit of rebellion coming through because you've criticized every little effort that they've made. So rather start with a praise. Praise the effort that they're putting in, and you'll find that their hearts and their minds will be just that much more open to trying to put a little bit more effort in for you. So those are all small things you can do. In terms of rewarding your children, I think that there's a place for it, but you just need to remember that that's a short-term motivation. It works short-term, and it's definitely not it's not developing their intrinsic motivation at all. It's because they're working towards, I want that sweet. And that sweet will not always be available, or will not always be the best selling point. Just some don'ts. Don't do it in a controlling or overbearing manner. Don't try and motivate your children that way. And motivating out of anger or frustration definitely is not going to make any change in your child at all. Yeah, I think that that's all I have to share with you at this point. So parents, keep motivating. And just a last thing, if you as a parent battle with intrinsic motivation, it is very hard to motivate your children in that way. So I think that it's really important that we try and keep our level of motivation up and positivity, and our children will feed off that. Thank you.